I was driving alone, a long haul from Little Rock to St. Louis, and it was one of those nights where the highway seems to stretch forever, the world reduced to the narrow strip of asphalt illuminated by headlights. It was late April, and the air had that damp, cool smell that comes after a brief rain during the day. The windshield was streaked with residual moisture, and my wipers kept a slow rhythm, sliding over the glass and catching the faint reflection of the dashboard lights. The cab of the truck was warm, the heater cutting through the chill, but the emptiness outside made it feel colder than it was. I was hauling a load of packaged grains, nothing fragile, nothing high profile. The cargo rattled slightly with every bump, a constant reminder of the weight behind me. The highway was nearly empty. I passed a few headlights in the distance every now and then, but mostly it was just the road, the trees pressing in from either side, and the occasional hum of wind over the cab. I had driven this route dozens of times, but the night made it feel unfamiliar. Shadows shifted in the beams of my headlights, the dark shapes of trees bending in the wind or perhaps just in my mind. Every curve in the road seemed sharper, every mile marker farther apart than usual. I tried to focus on the mechanics of driving, checking mirrors, monitoring my speed, and keeping the load balanced, but the quiet gnawed at me. After a while, the monotony of the road and the stillness of the night made me notice details I wouldn't normally notice. The way the tree-line leaned over the highway, the rhythm of the wipers, the faint smell of oil from the engine mixed with the lingering scent of rain. It was subtle at first, barely perceptible, but after hours of driving, it became almost oppressive. The cab felt smaller, the darkened road endless, and the occasional distant sound, a bird, a branch snapping, seemed unnaturally loud. I remember the way the headlights caught a slick patch of asphalt that reflected them like a mirror. I instinctively slowed, but the road was dry. About 2 hours into the stretch, I passed a cluster of abandoned buildings on the side of the road, structures I had never seen on this route before. They were old, wooden, and weather-beaten, the paint long gone, leaving the gray-brown wood exposed. Windows were broken, and the roof sagged, but they were set back far enough that I barely noticed until the headlights briefly illuminated them. There was a sense of stillness there, like time had stopped. I tried to convince myself I had missed them before, that they were just old farmhouses I'd overlooked. Still, the sudden appearance in the middle of the dark highway made my stomach tighten. I continued driving, the truck humming beneath me, tires rolling over the asphalt in a steady rhythm. The horizon ahead seemed to shift, not physically, but the sense of distance felt altered. Every mile marker I passed seemed closer, then farther away. My eyes strained against the darkness, and I found myself scanning the shoulders constantly, expecting to see something, anything, out of place. I tried to shake it, focusing on the rhythm of the truck, the feel of the wheel under my hands, the weight of the load on the suspension. After a while, I noticed movement on the shoulder, far off in the distance. At first, I thought it was a reflection or a trick of the headlights, but it grew clearer as I approached. A lone figure walking slowly along the edge of the road. No distinguishing features, just a silhouette against the dark tree-line. My heart rate increased, but I reminded myself that the highway had other travelers. People sometimes walk along roads late at night, and it was rural enough that a hitchhiker or someone out for a long walk wasn't impossible. I stayed in my lane, maintained a steady speed, and kept the headlights on the road. By the time I passed, the figure had disappeared into the darkness. No sign of turning off, no sound, just gone. The experience left a lingering unease. I couldn't explain it logically. There were no headlights behind it, no car to accompany it, and the stretch of road on either side was clear. I drove on, glancing occasionally at the mirrors, trying to convince myself it was just a shadow or fatigue playing tricks on my mind. The highway stretched on, dark and quiet, the edges lined with thick woods that absorbed every sound. My focus sharpened, every detail of the cab and the road taking precedence. I checked the load multiple times, the grain packages shifting slightly with every dip and rise. The sound of the engine, the low hum of tires, and the occasional clink of cargo chains were all I could rely on. Eventually, I reached a rest stop, one I recognized, and I pulled in, letting the truck idle as I took a long break. Stepping out of the cab, I felt the cool night air against my face, the chill of normalcy grounding me. I walked around the truck, checking the tires, the load, and the flatbed. Nothing out of place, nothing unusual except the residual tightness in my chest and the lingering sense that I had been watched. I made a note of the mile marker where I had seen the figure, but I knew it wouldn't appear on any official record. It was simply a detail to carry in memory. Once rested, I returned to the highway, the lights of St. Louis appearing on the horizon hours later. The monotony of the route returned, but the tension from the previous stretch stayed with me, subtle but present. I delivered the load without incident, unremarkable in every measurable way, but the memory of that night remained. The emptiness, the shadows, the figure along the shoulder, all of it grounded in reality, yet disturbing in a way that logic could not fully explain. I never reported it. There was no evidence, no reason to, and no one would have believed a lone figure disappearing into the darkness along an empty stretch of highway. But every time I drive long stretches alone at night now, I remember that night. I watch the shoulders more carefully, I notice the tree line more closely, and I remind myself to keep attention firmly on the road. There are things on the highway that are not dangerous in themselves, nothing supernatural, nothing beyond comprehension. But the human mind notices patterns, shadows, and the slightest movement, and when you're alone, it can make hours feel like an eternity. The night taught me a lesson in vigilance and patience. Driving alone is not inherently frightening, but long stretches of darkness and emptiness force awareness to sharpen in ways that city streets never demand. By the time I returned to my home base, the relief of seeing the familiar surroundings and knowing the route had remained unchanged grounded me completely. Nothing had changed in the world, nothing had touched the truck or the cargo, but the memory of being alone on that highway, watched by shadows, stayed with me. It remains a quiet reminder that even the most ordinary tasks can feel perilous when you are isolated, and that the world has a way of pressing against your senses when there is nothing else to anchor them. I had been hauling refrigerated meat from Billings to Missoula countless times over the years, but that October night in 2018 was different from anything I had experienced on the road. The air was sharp, biting at my face through the cracked vent, and snow dusted the edges of I-90, melting into slush as it hit the asphalt. The highway stretched ahead in a straight, dim ribbon, empty for miles in either direction. My truck felt heavier that night, not in weight but in atmosphere, like the road itself was holding its breath. I had left Billings in the late afternoon, just before the sun dipped below the horizon. The cab was warm from the heater, the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thunk of the tires over the expansion joints of the highway forming a steady, almost hypnotic cadence. I had a full load, the refrigerated trailer humming gently behind me, keeping the meat at the right temperature. Usually, this part of the drive was routine, hours of nothing but black pavement and white dashes stretching endlessly. But as I passed Butte, an unease settled in my chest. It started as a small knot, a flicker at the edge of my attention, something that felt off but impossible to place. About an hour outside of Butte, the truck's radio, which had been tuned to a local station, suddenly cut to static. I flicked the dial, checked the presets, but nothing came through. No music, no chatter, just that high-pitched hiss that made my ears ache after a few moments. I settled on leaving it there, trying to focus on the road. That's when the static began to change. At first, it was subtle, just a rhythm in the white noise, almost like background interference. Then I started to hear words, quiet, almost impossibly soft, but distinct enough that I froze. The sound didn't carry like a normal voice. It was contained in the speakers, in the static itself, whispering a phrase I could not ignore. "Turn back, don't go further." My heart jumped, the grip on the steering wheel tightening until my knuckles went white. I slammed the volume down, the whispering stopping immediately, leaving only the hum of the engine. My pulse was racing, and I knew I was fully awake now, alert in a way I had not been for the first 100 miles of the drive. I checked the mirrors, scanning for another truck, a car, anything, and for a brief moment I thought I saw headlights glinting behind me. I slowed instinctively, and as I focused, the lights seemed to vanish. The road was empty, nothing but the faint glare of the lines ahead and the dark shapes of distant hills. My GPS blinked erratically, then displayed the message that I had reached my destination. I frowned. According to the device, I was already in Missoula, but I was still on the highway, surrounded by the dark stretch of Montana night and the quiet crunch of snow at the roadside. I unplugged it, hoping it was a glitch, and tried to focus on familiar markers. The curve of the road, the outline of the river valley ahead, but nothing felt right. The landscape seemed unnaturally still. Even the wind that should have whispered through the gaps in the hills was absent. I decided to pull off at the next rest area. It should have been a place of relief, a simple spot to stretch my legs and check the load. When I entered, I was immediately unsettled. The lot was empty of life, completely deserted, and all of the cars parked there looked out of place. They were spotless, polished to the point of gleaming under the dim light of the street lamps. Tires were perfect, free of dust or wear, as if the vehicles had never moved. The small restroom building was locked, lights inside off, and I felt a cold draft that didn't belong anywhere in the enclosed space. I stayed in the cab for the rest of the night, leaving the engine running, the heater blasting, my eyes darting constantly to the mirrors and the empty lot. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too far, every sound amplified by the silence surrounding me. I kept checking my trailer, the locked doors behind me, the meat humming softly, trying to convince myself that it was just a routine glitch, that the whispering had been my imagination. Hours passed. I must have dozed off for a few moments because when I blinked awake, the lot was still empty, the vehicles unmoved, the quiet pressing against the cab like a weight. The smell of the refrigerated load mixed with the faint metallic scent of the air, creating a tangy, almost sour aroma. My stomach knotted from tension, from the sense of being watched, though I could see no one. At some point, I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my hands ached. I could feel the sweat on my back, despite the heat from the cab, and every time I shifted my gaze to the road ahead, the darkness seemed to deepen, stretching farther than it should. I didn't sleep again that night. Morning came eventually, though the light was weak and gray, filtered through clouds heavy with snow. The rest area was just as still as before. I started the truck and drove slowly back onto the highway, the cold creeping in again despite the heater. The whispering never returned, the GPS behaved normally, and the landscape seemed to reset itself into the familiar patterns of the route I knew. Still, I did not feel relief. Something had shifted that night, a weight in the air, a tension I could not explain, a warning I could not ignore. When I reached Missoula, I unloaded the trailer with mechanical precision, avoiding the usual small talk with the dock workers. I felt a lingering dread, a sense that returning to that route would invite the same strange phenomena. By the time I finished and parked the truck, I had made my decision. I quit that route for good. I called my dispatcher and explained that I would no longer be taking the Billings to Missoula Hall. No specific reason, just that I preferred another run, something safer, something predictable. In the weeks that followed, I replayed the night over and over in my mind. I could never fully explain the whispers, the empty rest area, or the gleaming cars that seemed frozen in time. I didn't tell anyone much, because it sounded ridiculous out loud, but I kept the details in my head, each recollection sharpening the unease I felt. It wasn't a ghost or a hallucination or a glitch of the mind. I know what I saw, what I heard. I just accepted that some parts of the road are not meant to be traversed alone at night. The truck became a kind of sanctuary, a cocoon against the strange and unknowable, and I treated every route after that with caution and respect. I never returned to that stretch of I-90 in late October again. I rerouted, changed schedules, and avoided night driving on isolated stretches whenever possible. I can't say for certain why that night felt the way it did, but I know one thing: it left an impression that I can't shake. I learned to listen to the road, to the hum of the engine, and to the faintest signals of danger, even if they don't make sense. And more than anything, I learned that sometimes the safest choice is simply to turn back, even when everything around you insists you should keep going. That night taught me that, and I've carried it with me on every mile since. I was hauling a flatbed load of steel beams from Harrisburg to Pittsburgh on a late October evening. The sun had just set when I left the city, painting the sky in a deep purple-black that swallowed the horizon. Traffic on the main highways had been heavier than usual, so I decided to take a back road I'd used a handful of times before, hoping to make up time. The road was narrow, winding through thick patches of forest that pressed in close on either side. By the time I reached it, streetlights had vanished, and the only illumination came from my headlights cutting through the dark. At first, the drive felt normal enough. The steel beams on the flatbed were strapped tight, secured by chains and binders. I kept a steady pace, careful not to overcorrect on the turns. The air was chilly, the kind that crawls into the cab and settles in your bones. I remember the smell of wet leaves and cold dirt, even though the asphalt itself was dry. The road curved and dipped between trees, and I noticed how quiet it had become, the kind of quiet that makes every creak and hum in the truck feel louder. I had been driving for about an hour when the trailer started to wobble. It was subtle at first, a slight side-to-side motion, but then it grew violent, like it wanted to slide out from under me. I pulled over immediately, my heart thudding as I engaged the parking brake and climbed down to check. The ground beneath the wheels looked normal at first glance, dry asphalt fading into the shoulder, but as I got closer, I realized something was very wrong. The wheels of the trailer were embedded in thick mud. Not a puddle, not a soft patch, just solid ground that somehow had turned into a viscous trap. My boots sank into it more than they should have, the mud clinging stubbornly as I tried to pull my foot free. I went around the trailer, checking the chains and binders, but everything was intact. The truck and load hadn't shifted. The problem was clearly with the trailer itself, stuck in the inexplicable mud. I tried rocking it, pulling back and forth slowly at first, then harder, gritting my teeth as the steel frame groaned under the strain. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl from the woods lining the road. It didn't sound like any dog I'd ever known. Too deep, too deliberate, and it carried a weight that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I froze, listening. There was movement in the trees, shadows shifting against the trunks. Nothing stepped into the light of my headlights, but the sound of twigs snapping and leaves rustling told me something was out there. It stayed just beyond sight, keeping pace with me as I moved. I checked the truck's mirrors repeatedly, scanning the dark for any sign, but the road behind and beside me remained empty. The growl came again, low and drawn, and I felt my stomach tighten. I wasn't sure what I was hearing, only that it was close and it was watching. I tried my radio, flicking through channels in the hope of a signal, but there was nothing. Static filled the cab, unbroken and unyielding. Dispatch would have been my next option, but with no reception, I had no way to call for help. The clock in the truck read 9:15 when I realized that staying put wasn't going to work. I was alone, with a trailer stuck in the middle of nowhere, and something moving in the woods just beyond the reach of my lights. I knew I had to leave the trailer and get to somewhere safer. I grabbed a flashlight, checked the map on my phone, which had no service, and set out on foot along the narrow road. My truck's lights were still on, the beams cutting through the darkness, casting long shadows from the trees onto the asphalt. The mud clung to my boots as I walked, the cold night air biting through my jacket. I kept glancing over my shoulder, imagining movement in the tree line, every rustle making me flinch. My eyes strained in the darkness, trying to catch even the smallest detail, but the forest seemed endless, swallowing the road whole. After what felt like hours but was probably closer to 40 minutes, I saw lights in the distance. A farmhouse, isolated but solid, with warm yellow light spilling from the windows. Relief washed over me as I moved toward it, my pace quickening despite the uneven shoulder and the weight of exhaustion pressing on my shoulders. When I reached the porch, I found the door unlocked. I entered and found the house quiet but lived in, the smell of old wood and oil from the stove filling the air. I stayed there until morning, too wound up to sleep, pacing and listening to every creak of the floorboards, half expecting the sounds from the road to follow me inside. The next day, a tow company came to retrieve the trailer. When I returned with them, the site was completely normal. The wheels were sitting evenly on solid ground, no mud at all. The asphalt was dry, clean, and undisturbed. The trailer itself showed no signs of damage. It was as if the night's events had never happened. The thought made my stomach twist. I explained the situation to the tow driver, but without evidence, it sounded absurd. They shrugged, hooked up the trailer, and I followed them back to the highway, keeping my eyes on the tree line, half expecting to see shadows watching. I never drove that road again. I checked every map and GPS, looking for an alternate route, but I avoided that back road for years. Even now, when I pass through Pennsylvania, I take the main highways, no matter the traffic. The memory of the mud, the growl, and the shadows in the trees stays with me. I don't try to rationalize it too much. There are some things out there that don't need an explanation. Things you don't want to meet on a lonely road at night. The night itself felt heavier than normal, and the memory of standing alone in that cold, silent stretch of back road is something I carry every time I drive after dark. It's a lesson I never needed to relearn. Some roads aren't meant for traveling alone, especially after the sun goes down. I was driving with Mike, my friend and coworker, hauling a load of produce from Columbus to Toledo in mid-June. The summer heat had already settled in, thick and heavy, even as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. We'd been on the road for several hours, the traffic light, the interstate stretching flat and straight before us, the cab quiet except for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the CB. We were both tired, our shoulders stiff from hours behind the wheel, and decided to stop for a break when I noticed a rest area on the shoulder we'd never seen before. There was no signage beyond a faded rest stop, painted on a metal arch, but something about it caught my eye, and we both agreed we needed a pause. The rest area was almost completely deserted, more than I expected even at this hour. The pavement was cracked, weeds pushing up through the asphalt, and the small building at the center looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in years. The paint peeled from the walls in long curling strips, and the lights above the doors flickered weakly before cutting out entirely, leaving the building half drowned in the dim orange of the fading sun. As we pulled into the lot, the silence struck me first. No distant engines, no crickets or birds, nothing but the soft rustle of a wind that barely moved the long, dry grass along the edges of the lot. Mike and I got out of the truck, stretching our legs, and made our way toward the building. The air smelled strange even before we entered, a mix of rotting wood, harsh chemicals, and a metallic tang that reminded me of iron. The doors creaked as we pushed them open, revealing the interior. Dust hung thick in the air, motes drifting lazily in the faint shafts of light that managed to pierce the grime on the windows. The tile floor was cracked and uneven, streaked with old water stains, and the ceilings had darkened patches that suggested long-term water damage. We headed toward the bathrooms, hoping at least for running water, but the smell hit harder the closer we got. It was heavy and cloying, a combination of decay and rust, the kind of odor that sticks to your throat and makes you swallow repeatedly. The stalls were empty, the metal hinges rusted and squeaking, the doors barely hanging on their frames. The sinks were grimy, but water still dripped intermittently from the faucets, the soft plink of drops echoing in the otherwise silent room. That sound, more than anything, made the place feel alive in a way I couldn't explain. What really unsettled me, though, were the scratches on the walls. They ran vertically, deep and long, like something had tried to claw its way up. The lines were uneven, jagged, and overlapping, some reaching from the floor almost to the ceiling. I crouched to examine them closer, running my fingers lightly over the grooves, feeling the rough, splintered texture. There was no pattern, no obvious purpose, just chaotic scraping that looked violent. Mike leaned against the wall opposite me, quiet, eyes scanning the room. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. The place itself communicated enough, the combination of smell, sound, and texture setting every nerve on edge. I didn't want to stay longer than necessary. We left the building quickly, stepping out into the fading light, ears straining for any sound beyond our own movement. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the dry grass, and the lot looked more empty than it had when we arrived, though I couldn't explain why that realization made my chest tighten. Mike climbed back into the passenger seat while I circled the truck, checking the load before settling into the driver's seat. I started the engine, the hum grounding me after the oppressive quiet inside the rest stop. As we began to pull away, I glanced in the rearview mirror out of habit. That's when I saw it. Someone, or something, standing at the far end of the parking lot. I froze, my grip tightening on the wheel. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, and yet there was a presence there that seemed deliberate. No features could be made out, no face, no details, just a dark shape, tall and thin, positioned perfectly in the dim light between the cracked pavement and the long weeds at the edge. I blinked, thinking it might be a trick of the shadows, a result of fatigue, but when I looked again, it was still there. I accelerated slightly, keeping my eyes on the figure. It didn't move. I focused on the road ahead, trying to shake the lingering unease, telling myself it was probably someone trespassing or even a discarded mannequin left behind by vandals. My mind ran through plausible explanations, but none of them fully satisfied the sense of wrongness that had settled in my chest. Mike glanced at me once, expression tight, but said nothing. Neither of us could. The silence between us was heavier than the one at the rest stop, filled now with shared awareness of what we had just left behind. We reached the interstate proper, the familiar stretch of I-75 easing the tension just enough for my heartbeat to slow. The deserted rest area receded behind us, the shape in the parking lot gone from view, though the memory of it lingered in the mirror. I glanced again, half expecting it to appear on another corner or near another cracked section of pavement. But the lot was empty. There was no evidence it had ever existed, no tire tracks or footprints, nothing to mark the figure's presence. I never stopped at that rest area again. Months later, I tried to find it on maps and satellite images, searching for any sign that such a lot existed along the stretch we had traveled. Nothing showed up. The highway was continuous, uniform, and lined with the exits and signage I expected. It was as if the building, the scratches, the figure, and the smell had all been a fleeting apparition, a brief anomaly in the otherwise predictable world of highways and rest stops. To this day, whenever I drive I-75 through Ohio, I find myself scanning the shoulders, even in daylight, checking for anything unusual in empty lots, overgrown areas, or abandoned buildings. The experience taught me that there are places people leave behind, spaces where time and decay intersect in ways that make your mind question what is real. I delivered the produce to Toledo without further incident, but the memory of that rest stop, the smell, the scratches, the figure, stays with me, a cautionary reminder that even familiar roads can hold corners of strangeness and quiet unease, and sometimes the safest action is simply to leave and never look back. I was driving my rig through the Nevada desert in late August, hauling a flatbed of solar panels from Las Vegas to Reno. My name's Jake Simmons, and I've been trucking for nearly 15 years. Most of the time, I stick to the main highways, the familiar stretches that have become second nature. That night, though, I decided to try a backroad shortcut I hadn't taken before. It was late, around 11 p.m., and the desert was the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, a silence so complete it feels almost physical. The cab of the truck smelled faintly of engine oil and warm upholstery, and my hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, though I told myself it was just habit. The highway was nearly empty, the asphalt stretching endlessly under the dim glow of my headlights. The desert on either side was a flat expanse of sagebrush and scattered rocks, and the moon had yet to climb high enough to cast real light. I kept a steady pace, easing the rig through gentle curves, the solar panels on the flatbed secured with every chain and strap I had. The desert air was dry, carrying the smell of sand and dust into the cab each time I cracked the window. After a while, the road began to twist in ways that felt off. The curves were sharper than they should have been, the turns more frequent, and the GPS on my dash was spinning like it had no idea where I was. I double-checked my route, scanning the map on my phone. The backroads I had planned didn't look like this at all, yet I had no choice but to keep driving. The rig was heavy, and backing up on a narrow desert road with no shoulder was out of the question. Then I saw it. A highway sign, sudden and out of place, illuminated by my headlights. It read "Welcome to Esmeralda County," in bold letters. I frowned and slowed. The map on my phone didn't show any county by that name anywhere along this route. I checked the GPS again. The red dot representing my location hovered between nothing and nowhere, spinning back and forth as if unsure what to do with me. My stomach tightened, and a low hum of anxiety settled in my chest. I kept driving, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Nevada is a state with sparse population, and small towns and counties can be hard to track on some maps. Maybe the sign was old, a remnant of some outdated boundary. That seemed plausible. Still, there was a nagging unease in the way the highway felt different. The road should have been straight here, but instead it curved sharply, almost unnaturally, and the desert on either side seemed more empty than it had a moment before. Shadows along the edges of the road stretched longer than they should have, distorted by the angle of my headlights. I was passing a slight rise when I noticed a figure on the shoulder. A man, motionless, standing at the edge of the road. He wore tattered clothes, and I remember the way the moonlight, or whatever faint light there was, caught on his face. It was impossible to see details, but he stared directly at me, unmoving, like a statue. My first thought was that he needed help. My second thought was that I should honk, just to make sure he didn't step into the road. I did, letting the horn blare, my heart pounding in my ears. The figure was gone, just like that, vanished. No sound of retreat, no movement, nothing. 1 second he was there, the next nothing but empty shoulder and desert scrub. I blinked hard, thinking it was a trick of the headlights, or a shadow cast wrong by the curvature of the road. I checked the mirrors, slowed the truck to a crawl, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The shoulder was empty, the desert just as silent as it had been before. I pressed on, keeping a tight grip on the wheel, eyes scanning for anything else unusual. The road eventually leveled out, the unnatural curves eased, and after a few more miles, I took the next exit. It led me back to a stretch of highway that looked completely normal. The asphalt was familiar, the GPS returned to its usual display of roads and towns, and the desert beyond the shoulders seemed as ordinary as the night sky itself. The strange county sign, the spinning GPS, the figure on the shoulder, all of it vanished as if it had never existed. I kept driving to Reno, not daring to slow until the city lights appeared on the horizon, washing the desert night away. The incident stayed with me, though. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the way the desert had bent around me, how a county could appear that didn't exist, and a man could vanish so completely. I thought about reporting it, telling someone at the trucking company or even the state patrol, but I didn't. Who would believe a story like that? A desert that shifts, a highway that bends, a man that disappears? It would sound like a hallucination, a tired trucker's imagination running wild. I never drove that back road again. Even years later, I avoid anything that remotely resembles it, taking the longer route through known highways, even if it costs more time. Sometimes, when I'm alone on a quiet stretch at night, I think back to that drive. The empty desert, the spinning GPS, the sudden county sign, the man on the shoulder. I don't have an explanation, and I've stopped trying to force one. Some things I've learned just happen. The desert has a way of feeling larger than it should, of making you doubt your own senses, and for that night, I'll carry the memory. It's a reminder that even roads you think you know can take you somewhere completely uncharted. And sometimes the only safe course is to stick to the ones that have always led somewhere real. Since then, I've kept meticulous notes of every route I take, every deviation, and I've learned to trust what I can verify. The truck, the load, the map, the GPS, everything I can confirm is what I rely on. That night in the desert reminded me that beyond the rules and measurements of highways, there's uncertainty, and no amount of experience can fully prepare you for it. I made it to Reno safely, delivered the solar panels, and returned the rig to the yard. But the memory lingers, a quiet reminder in the back of my mind every time I pull onto a road that looks too empty, too unfamiliar, too silent. The desert didn't break me. It just reminded me how fragile certainty can be when the world around you refuses to make sense. I was hauling a load of refrigerated poultry from Lexington, Kentucky, to St. Louis in late November. The roads were slick with a mix of leftover rain and early frost, and the mornings were already dark before 6. I'd taken this route hundreds of times, mostly through back roads to avoid I-64 congestion, and I knew the twists and hills like the back of my hand. That familiarity, normally comforting, started to work against me that night. I left the yard at 5:30 a.m., the sky barely a dull gray, with a thin layer of mist hanging low over the fields. My rig, a 2017 Freightliner Cascadia with a 53-foot refrigerated trailer, hummed steadily under me. I ran through my pre-trip routine mechanically, checking tires, brakes, lights, and reefer settings. The cargo had been loaded the evening before, tightly packed and frozen to the right temperature. But something about the silence of the early morning air felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint why. By the time I hit the back roads south of Frankfurt, the fog had thickened. It hung around the trees and fences, clinging to the asphalt, making the headlights barely reach 10 feet in front of me. I slowed down instinctively, feeling the tires creep over wet patches that might be ice. Visibility was bad enough that every reflective road sign was a momentary shock. I kept my speed under 30, easing around blind curves and tight hills, thinking about the hours ahead. About 30 miles in, my trailer started to sway lightly. At first, I ignored it, assuming the frost or uneven road was causing it. But then it increased and I felt the rig shift under me. I glanced at the side mirrors. The fog made it impossible to see much, but the trailer's rear tires seemed to be digging into the road in a strange way. I pulled over onto a shoulder that was mostly dirt and gravel, careful not to slip. Stepping out, the cold hit me hard, sharp and biting. My breath condensed immediately, and I could see the fog rolling past the cab like a slow river. I walked around the trailer. The tires weren't frozen or wet. They were sunk into the ground. Not mud, not snow, just the pavement itself seemed to have absorbed them. I knelt down to inspect and realized the asphalt had cracked beneath the trailer in long fissures. It was subtle at first, almost invisible in the fog, but as I shined my flashlight along the ground, I could see the edges where the tires had sunk. I tried to rock the trailer free. Forward, back, left, right. Nothing worked. The trailer didn't slide. It didn't budge. It just sat there, heavy and immovable. My stomach started tightening. The road was isolated, with woods on either side, dark and still. No cars had passed me for at least 20 minutes, maybe longer. I could hear the faint hum of the reefer, but other than that, only the wind through the trees, the low groan of the trailer, and the occasional drip of condensation hitting the asphalt. I pulled out my phone. No signal. I walked to the top of a small hill nearby, waving it in every direction, hoping for a bar. Nothing. The fog and the trees swallowed the landscape. I started thinking about what I'd do if I had to leave the trailer. Walking through these woods alone in freezing temperatures was risky, but staying here wasn't an option either. I decided to hike toward a farmhouse I remembered seeing on my map, roughly 2 miles down the road. I left the truck, flashlight and jacket in hand, walking slowly, trying to keep my footing on the icy patches. Every step seemed louder than it should have been. I noticed that the fog wasn't just low. It seemed to be moving strangely, swirling as though the air itself were heavier. Branches cracked under my weight, and every shadow between trees looked like something more than it was. I kept reminding myself this was a rural area, that I'd been here before, that it was just early fog and my mind playing tricks. After 40 minutes, I reached the farmhouse. It was dark, quiet, and clearly abandoned. I banged on the door, but no one answered. The place smelled of dust, rot, and old wood. I considered waiting there until morning but knew it wasn't safe to stay outside in the cold all night. I found a small outbuilding near the back and huddled inside, my flashlight propped on a crate. I wrapped myself in my jacket, trying to make myself small and warm. Every few minutes, I would glance toward the road. My trailer wasn't visible from here, swallowed by the fog and trees, but I could almost feel its weight out there. Hours passed slowly. My eyes stung from the cold, my hands were numb, and I kept drifting in and out of sleep. Every time I opened them, the mist seemed closer. I began imagining things in the distance, movements along the road, shadows that weren't there. I reminded myself to breathe, tried to keep my mind on the fact that I had seen this road many times before. At first light, the fog had lifted, revealing the road exactly as it should be. I hiked back, bracing myself for the scene of disaster I expected. When I reached the trailer, it was normal. Tires intact, perfectly aligned on the asphalt. No cracks, no sinking, no disturbance at all. It was as if nothing had happened. The trailer hummed steadily, and the cargo inside had remained frozen. I shook my head, looking around. Everything was still ordinary, the woods just woods, the road just road. I hooked up to the trailer and drove the rest of the route carefully, thinking the entire way about what had happened. My mind tried to rationalize it. Frost heaving, sleep deprivation, fog-induced optical illusions. Maybe the road had shifted temporarily, maybe I'd imagined part of it. But I couldn't shake the feeling of the weight of the trailer, the strange immobility, the isolation in that fog. It had been real enough to scare me completely. I reached St. Louis by late afternoon. The client inspected the cargo, nothing damaged, everything perfect. I went to the yard to drop the trailer, still thinking about the road, the fog, and how a simple early morning run had felt like being trapped somewhere beyond control. I've avoided that stretch of back road ever since, always taking the interstate no matter the traffic. Some things you just don't risk seeing again. Even months later, I still remember the tight, sinking feeling of the trailer under me, the oppressive silence of the fog, and the sheer helplessness of being completely alone on a road that should have been familiar. It's the memory that sticks, more than the cracked asphalt or the phantom resistance of the tires. That day reminded me how small control really is when you're out there behind the wheel and the world around you simply refuses to behave as it should.